Have you ever looked around your own living room filled with the voices of people you love and still felt completely alone? The television hums in the background. The dishwasher clicks. Your adult children are laughing about something that happened at work. The grandkids are arguing over screen time again. And you're sitting right there at the table, still in the same chair you've sat in for years. Present, polite, maybe even smiling, but somehow not seen. It's not that they don't love you. You know they do. It's just that the version of you they love no longer feels like you. This is the loneliness no one talks about. Not the loneliness of losing someone, but the loneliness of being surrounded by everyone and still fading. As the old ones said, silence does not always mean peace. Sometimes it's the loudest sound in a house. That's where our story begins. With a woman named Ellen, 68, widowed. Once a high school literature teacher, now a quiet presence in her son's busy suburban household. She cooks dinner, folds towels, picks up the kids from school. She's always there, and yet she hasn't felt home in years. No one's cruel, no one's shouting. But love, when rushed, starts to feel like distance. And Ellen has learned how to disappear in plain sight. She tells herself she's fine, that this is that this is love. But something inside her aches. A soft, quiet ache that says, there must be more than this. More than polite thank yous. More than being the family helper. More than being the family helper. More than being praised for not needing anything. Because somewhere along the way, Ellen stopped asking herself the most sacred question. What does it mean to love yourself, when even the people closest to you don't know how to love you back? This isn't a story about leaving. It's a story about returning. Returning to silence, to breath, to a softness that asks for nothing, but begins to change everything. And if any part of this feels familiar, if you've ever felt drained, invisible, or quietly unloved by the people you do anything for, then this story isn't just Ellen's. It's yours too. In the next chapter, we'll step into Ellen's life. The house, the rhythms, the soft rituals she's built to survive. We'll see what no one else in her family sees, and slowly we'll watch her begin to remember the part of her that was never meant to be forgotten. But before that, just take a breath. Not for anyone else, just for you. Because the journey you're about to witness may be the one your own heart has been waiting to hear. Ellen's house sat on a quiet corner of a suburban neighborhood in Fremont, California. Rows of identical homes stretched in either direction. Their front lawns tidy, their blinds mostly drawn. The kind of place that looks peaceful on the outside, but inside, behind closed doors, whole lives go unseen. Ellen lived there with her son David, his wife Megan, and their 2 children, Ben and Sophie. 10 years ago, it had been her dream. A new chapter, a second chance. David had insisted she move in after his father passed. You won't be alone, Mom, he'd said. It'll be good for all of us. And at first it was. At first she felt needed, useful. She cooked meals, picked up the kids, kept the household running while David and Megan juggled work and late-night conference calls. She was the quiet backbone of the home, always present, always dependable. But over time, something shifted. It wasn't a fight, not a moment she could point to, just a slow fading, like color draining from fabric in the sun. The conversations grew shorter, the hugs more distracted, the thank yous less frequent. One day, Ellen realized it had been weeks since anyone asked her how she was sleeping, whether she was happy, whether she was even okay. She noticed the small things first. Family dinners where everyone ate quickly and scattered. Mornings where she came down early, made coffee for everyone, and found herself drinking it alone. Her grandchildren, once eager for her stories, now sat at the table with earbuds in, laughing at something on their phones. She smiled, tried to join in, but the jokes moved too fast. The world felt too far away. "Grandma, you wouldn't get it," Sophie had once said kindly, patting her hand. "It's TikTok," Ellen nodded, pretending it didn't sting. She was always pretending that it didn't bother her when Megan reorganized the kitchen without telling her. Pretending it was okay when David said, "Let's give Mom some space. She needs her quiet time." Pretending that she liked eating lunch alone most days. She told herself, "They're busy. They're stressed. It's not personal." And it wasn't. But it was still painful, because no one ever said, "We miss you at dinner." No one ever asked, "How was your day, Mom?" No one ever noticed when she skipped her morning walk for 3 days in a row because she couldn't bring herself to get out of bed. And yet, she kept giving. That's what mothers do, right? That's what wives do. What women do. What Ellen had done her whole life. Until one morning, she stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes and suddenly forgot what day it was. Her hands froze in the water. The sponge slipped from her fingers, and a sharp wave of dizziness passed through her like a ghost. She sat down at the table, heart racing. No one else was home. Just the ticking of the wall clock, just her breath. And in that moment, something broke. Not her body, not her mind, but the illusion she had clung to, that being needed and being loved were the same thing. She reached for her notebook, the one she used to write grocery lists. Instead, she wrote, "Today I realized no one sees me anymore." But worse than that, I stopped seeing myself. That night, she went to bed without saying goodnight to anyone. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, clutching the small blue pillow she always slept with. It wasn't fancy, just a soft silk pillow her late husband gave her on their last anniversary together. "So you'll always have something gentle to rest your head on," he'd said. That pillow had outlasted everything. The house they sold, the friends who drifted away, even him. It was the one thing in her life that hadn't changed. It still held the scent of lavender, still reminded her of who she used to be. When someone saw her not as a burden, not as background, but as someone who mattered. The next day, Ellen sat in the garden. Alone, she watched the wind pass through the trees, the sun warming the bricks beneath her feet. And for a long time she didn't move. She didn't cry. She didn't distract herself. She just sat there and felt everything. The loneliness, the confusion, the dull ache of giving too much and receiving too little. And for the first time, she didn't push it away. That afternoon, she walked 3 blocks to a local Buddhist center she had passed for years but never entered. The sign out front said, "Peace isn't given, it's remembered." She stepped inside, and the air changed. It smelled of incense, of quiet, of presence. A young woman greeted her, wearing simple robes. "Welcome. Would you like to sit?" Ellen nodded. She didn't explain herself, didn't tell her story. She just sat. And in the silence of that space, she felt something loosen. The same feeling you get when you take off shoes that are too tight. The soft relief of not performing, not pleasing, not shrinking. When the meditation ended, a teacher came over. He had kind eyes, a soft voice. "You carry a lot," he said. Helen smiled, surprised. "I guess I do." Buddha once said, the teacher whispered, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." Ellen felt something rise in her throat, a kind of remembering, like hearing your name after years of being called Mom or Grandma or Mrs. Collins. That night, she didn't wait for the family to go to bed before writing in her notebook. She opened to a fresh page and wrote, "Today I began to see myself again. I am not invisible. I am not optional. I am Ellen, and I am learning to love her again." No one in the house knew what had changed. But over the next few weeks, things did shift. Ellen started waking early again, but this time not to cook. She walked to the park. She started journaling every morning. She signed up for a mindfulness class at the temple. She lit a candle each night, whispered her husband's name, and said thank you, not for the past, but for the reminder that love doesn't have to disappear. She didn't stop helping her family. She still cared, still folded the kids' laundry with care, still refilled the coffee pot. But now, she didn't do it to be noticed. She did it because she chose to. She stopped chasing validation, and slowly, very slowly, she started choosing herself. There were days when the loneliness still returned. Days when David forgot her birthday, when Megan snapped at her over something small, when the grandkids barely looked up from their screens. But Ellen no longer let those moments define her. She had something now that no one could take away. She had a soft blue pillow. She had a notebook filled with truth. She had silence that didn't hurt anymore. And most importantly, she had herself. There's a quiet kind of grief that doesn't come from death, but from being forgotten while still alive. Ellen once told herself it was just part of aging, this feeling of becoming more background than person. She tried to ignore it, minimize it, fold it away like old linens in the back of a closet. But some things can't be folded. Some things whisper to you when the world gets quiet. For Ellen, it was a simple object, a small silk pillow, pale blue, the color of a calm lake at dawn, lightly frayed at the corners. It had been her husband's last gift to her. Not expensive, not flashy, but it held something no one else in her life had offered her in years: unconditional softness. She never told her son about it, or her grandchildren. It wasn't a family heirloom or anything special in a material sense. But to Ellen, that pillow was sacred, because every night, after the dishwasher stopped humming, after the hallway lights were switched off, she would lie on her side, curl up in silence, and pull that pillow close to her chest. And breathe. That's where the memories came back. Her husband's laughter, The way he always warmed her side of the bed in winter. The Sunday mornings where they read the newspaper slowly, aloud, sipping too hot coffee and laughing at the horoscopes. They hadn't always agreed. They'd had their arguments, but she had never questioned her place beside him. She had never felt like a ghost. This pillow, it reminded her what it felt like to belong. But the strange thing about sacred objects is they don't just hold the past. They start to speak to the present. Ellen began noticing how much she had given up. Not in dramatic, sweeping ways, but in 1,000 tiny self-abandonments. The favorite tea she stopped buying because no one else drank it. The poetry books left unread because who has time? The walks she skipped because she didn't want to be in the way. It was all small, quiet, but the cost had accumulated like dust, layer by invisible layer. And now, as she clutched that silk pillow each night, something began to rise in her. A gentle revolt. A memory, not of who she had been, but of who she had been, but of who she still was. One afternoon, Ellen took the pillow and placed it by the window seat in her bedroom. She sat beside it, opened her notebook and wrote just 5 words. I remember who I am. Then she poured herself a cup of Earl Grey, just the way she liked it, strong with a splash of oat milk, and sat in that warm square of sunlight, doing absolutely nothing, except being. No guilt, no apology, no explanation. That was the beginning of something new. At first, no one noticed, not even her son, David. She still helped out, still folded towels, still packed lunches, but she no longer rushed, no longer jumped up at every call. She gave, but not at the expense of her own breath. Then one evening, after dinner, she didn't clear the plates. She simply stood up, looked at Megan and said, I'm going to take a walk before the light fades. And then she left. It was the first time in years she had chosen herself in front of others. It was the first time in years she hadn't apologized for needing space. She walked slowly, the twilight wrapping the streets in a soft golden hush. The breeze brushed her face like a whisper from the past. She felt her feet in her shoes, the weight of her cardigan, the rhythm of her breath. She was alive. And for the first time in a long time, she felt it. That walk became a habit. Every evening, same time. Her phone stayed on silent. No music, no distraction. Just her, the sky, and the sidewalk beneath her. She began noticing things. A hummingbird that always appeared near the neighbor's azalea bush. The couple 2 blocks down who walked their dog at exactly 6:45 p.m. The way certain trees seemed to change color faster than others. The way her heart seemed to beat more gently when she wasn't bracing for the next demand. And every time she came home, she returned, not as a servant, but as a woman. Her family didn't quite know what to make of it. Everything okay, Mom? David asked one night. Everything's fine, Ellen said with a soft smile. Just getting to know myself again. He blinked, nodded, and went back to his laptop. But something had shifted in her tone, in her energy, and slowly, even if they didn't say it, they noticed. She wasn't bitter. She wasn't distant, but she was anchored now, rooted in herself. There's a moment that came one evening, 2 weeks into this new rhythm, that Ellen would later call her return. It was a Sunday. She'd just come back from her walk and found Sophie sitting alone in the living room, headphones off for once, staring at a half-finished drawing. Ellen paused, walked over, sat beside her without a word. After a few moments, Sophie said, "Grandma, do you ever feel like you don't belong?" The question landed in her chest like a stone dropped in still water. She looked at her granddaughter, saw the quiet ache in her eyes, the same one she had been hiding for years. Instead of answering right away, Ellen reached for the silk pillow on the chair behind her, placed it between them and said, "You know, someone gave me this a long time ago. Not because it was fancy, but because it reminded me that softness matters, that no matter how noisy the world gets, we're allowed to rest." Sophie leaned into her shoulder. Ellen didn't lecture, didn't try to fix anything. She just sat there, holding the pillow, holding the space, holding herself. That night, she wrote, "Sometimes the greatest love we give to others is found in the love we finally give to ourselves." At the soft thread where the seam had started to wear, she didn't try to fix it. She let it be, because not everything needs mending. Some things need witnessing. And that's what the pillow had always done. It held her story without changing her, without asking her to be smaller, quieter, less. It just stayed. Ellen began to understand. The real practice isn't giving everything you have. It's giving from a place that never leaves you empty. Buddhism teaches to understand everything is to forgive everything. But first, you must understand yourself. And Ellen, in her quiet corner of the world, with her silk pillow and her slowing heart and her returning breath, was finally beginning to understand. Not the past, not the people, but herself. There's a kind of ache that doesn't come from being unloved, but from being loved poorly. Ellen didn't always have the words for it. Some days, it felt like a bruise she couldn't place. Other days, it felt like walking barefoot in her own home. Nothing violent, nothing cruel, just the constant discomfort of never fully arriving. And here's the hardest part about it all. She knew her family loved her. David, her only son, had always been a kind boy. Megan, her daughter-in-law, was responsible, organized, never disrespectful. Her grandchildren didn't slam doors or yell or rebel. On paper, it all looked fine. But love that isn't expressed with attention, love that forgets to listen, begins to feel like noise. And love that only takes without refilling, quietly becomes a form of emptiness. Ellen had spent years brushing this off. They're just busy. They're stressed. I shouldn't expect so much. But expectations were never the problem. Neglect was. Not the dramatic kind, but the slow erosion of care. The kind that happens in comfortable homes, in families that mean well, in people who simply don't know how to love deeply. She began to see it clearly one Friday evening. Dinner had come and gone. Ellen had made her signature lemon chicken, something David had loved since he was a teenager. Everyone ate quickly. There was laughter, yes, but it swirled around things she didn't understand. Instagram, inside jokes, school gossip. No one asked how her walk had gone. No one asked how she felt that day. Then Megan stood up, took her plate to the sink and said, "Thanks for dinner, Ellen. We've got to finish up a project before bed." David kissed her cheek. "Love you, Mom," he said automatically, already walking away. Ellen sat there for a moment, fork in hand, table half cleared, heart full of questions. She stared at the plate, at the lemon slice untouched on David's napkin, and in that stillness, the sentence came to her, not in anger, but in stunning clarity. "They love the things I do, but they do not love who I am." It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't rage. It was truth, and it broke something open. That night, she didn't clean the kitchen. She left the dishes. She made herself tea, and she sat by the window holding the small silk pillow like a lantern in the dark. For a while, she just breathed. And then softly, she whispered something, not to her family, but to herself. "They don't know how to love me, but I do." It was the first time she had ever said it out loud. The next morning, Ellen didn't offer to make breakfast. She didn't fold the laundry or water the plants or organize the pantry. She poured herself coffee, opened her notebook and wrote, "Today I will not trade my softness for usefulness. I will not offer myself up like a tool. I am not here to make life easier for others while mine becomes smaller." Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She called a friend. Margot had been a colleague back in her teaching days. A sharp, funny, warm woman who had always reminded Ellen of cinnamon and laughter. They'd lost touch after retirement, after her husband passed, after life had shifted. But some part of Ellen was done waiting, done hoping for love to trickle down from people who were too distracted to notice her thirst. So she picked up the phone, and Margot answered. "Ellen, is that really you?" They talked for 42 minutes, about nothing and about everything. By the end of the call, they had a date for lunch next Tuesday. When Ellen hung up, she didn't cry. She just sat there, hand on the silk pillow, smiling. That single moment marked the beginning of her reclaiming. Because here's the truth Buddhism whispers, gently, but without compromise. The cause of suffering is attachment, not to people, but to how we think they should be. Ellen had spent years believing that family love meant reciprocity. That if she gave enough, cared enough, stayed quiet enough, eventually they'd see her, hear her. But she had never paused to ask, what if they don't know how? What if they're simply doing what they were taught, rushing, consuming, surviving, and no one ever taught them the art of seeing others clearly? It wasn't her fault, but it was her responsibility, not to fix them, but to stop shrinking for them. That weekend, something remarkable happened. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just real. David noticed the dishes weren't done. Megan noticed the laundry was still in the basket. And the kids noticed their snacks hadn't been restocked. "Mom, everything okay?" David asked. Ellen looked up from her book, calm. "Everything's fine, but did something happen?" She set the book down, took a breath, and said, with the gentleness of a breeze moving through trees, "I just realized I don't need to keep proving my worth through chores. I'm here. I love you. But I also need time for myself now." David looked surprised. There was no fight, no guilt, no explosion. Just a pause, and sometimes that's all it takes to wake people up. The next evening, David made dinner. It was a little too salty. The rice was slightly undercooked, but Ellen ate it with gratitude, because it wasn't about the food. It was about being seen. And that night, she added to her notebook, "They may never love me perfectly, but that no longer decides how I love myself." This is not a story with a fairy tale ending. Her family didn't become Buddhist overnight. They still got distracted, still forgot things, still slipped into patterns. But so did she. And that was the beauty of it. Compassion didn't mean tolerating everything. It meant loving them without betraying herself. She stopped waiting for them to ask her questions and started answering her own. She stopped setting the dinner table for them and started sitting at the table with herself. And as she did, something shifted. Not loudly, not all at once, but enough. Ellen had found the one love that can never drain you. The kind you offer yourself, quietly, daily, without conditions. And slowly, she began to teach her family, not with words, but with presence, what it looks like to love from fullness, not depletion. What it feels like to sit beside someone who doesn't need your approval to be whole. What it means to be soft without being erased. It happened on a Monday, a regular Monday. No storm, no crisis, no raised voices. Just Ellen standing by the living room window, holding a folded blanket. That morning, Megan had said something offhanded, nothing cruel, nothing new, just another pebble on the growing pile. "You know, if you could just wait until I'm done with my meetings before vacuuming, that would be great. It's been kind of disruptive lately." Ellen nodded. She always nodded. She always said sorry when the blender was too loud, when she sneezed, when she forgot to pick up oat milk, when the flowers in the hallway made someone's allergies flare. She had been saying sorry for decades, and not just to other people, but silently, constantly to herself. Sorry for needing rest. Sorry for not being more useful. Sorry for existing so quietly that no one remembers I'm here. But something about that Monday made her pause. It wasn't the comment. It wasn't the request. It was the weight of it. How casually her presence had become an inconvenience. And she thought, I have built this home with my presence. Why am I still apologizing for being in it? She set the folded blanket on the couch, took a deep breath, and instead of returning to her room, she walked outside. The sky was a soft, overcast gray, the kind of color that doesn't demand attention but still holds beauty if you're willing to look closer. Ellen walked to her usual bench at the small park nearby, a place she had started visiting more and more. And this time, she didn't bring her phone. She didn't bring a book. She didn't bring a plan. She brought herself. And that was enough. She sat for almost an hour, watched the wind bend the branches, watched a boy chase his hat down the sidewalk, watched her own hands resting in her lap, older now, softer, still strong. And there in that stillness, a thought arrived, so quiet she almost missed it. What if I just stopped apologizing? Not out of defiance, but out of clarity. She didn't mean becoming hard, cold, sharp. She meant this, no longer shrinking herself in order to keep others comfortable. She didn't owe anyone her silence. She didn't owe anyone her guilt. She had carried their comfort on her back for too long, and somewhere along the way she'd forgotten she could set it down. Buddhism teaches, speak only when your words are more beautiful than silence, but never silence your truth out of fear. That evening when she came home, Megan was making dinner. David was at the counter with his laptop. The kids were arguing quietly over something trivial. No one looked up, and Ellen, for once, didn't mind. She walked into the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and stood still. Then Megan said, "Hey, Mom, would you mind loading the dishwasher? I'm trying to finish this sauce." Ellen turned toward her, calm, kind, and said the words she had never spoken before. "No, not right now. I'm going to rest." She didn't justify it, didn't say, "Sorry, I'm tired." Didn't offer to do it later, didn't explain her worth. She just said no and stayed there, present, grounded, unapologetic. Megan blinked. Oh, okay, sure, and that was it. No explosion, no icy tension. Just a new boundary being born in the quietest, gentlest way. That night, Ellen sat by her window with her silk pillow and notebook. She lit a small candle, and she wrote, "Today, I didn't say sorry for existing. Today, I didn't apologize for needing peace. Today, I remembered that I am not here to be convenient. I am here to be whole. There's something sacred about the first time you say no without guilt. It's like learning to breathe again after years of shallow inhales." She began noticing how many times she almost apologized throughout the week. When David misplaced his keys, and she didn't jump to find them. When the kids were loud and she chose to close her door instead of scolding them. When Megan rearranged the spice cabinet, and Ellen didn't say a word. Not because she didn't care, but because it wasn't hers to fix. It was as if her soul had been whispering for years, "You don't need to apologize for being here." And she had finally started listening. There was a shift, not just in Ellen, but in the house. Subtle but real. David began asking more questions. "Mom, how was your walk? Do you want to join us for the movie?" He still forgot things. Still got distracted, but something in his voice had softened. There was more presence now, more space for her. One evening he said, "You've been different lately, happier." Ellen smiled. "Not happier, just more myself." And then she added something he didn't expect. "I stopped confusing love with obligation." He didn't know what to say, and that was okay. She hadn't said it for him. She had said it for the younger version of herself. The one who'd swallowed her needs for decades, thinking that's what good mothers do. That night, as she placed her silk pillow on the bed, she imagined that younger Ellen, 35, tired, holding everything together. And she whispered to her, "You did the best you could, and now I'll take it from here." There are days when Ellen still slips back into old habits. She still folds too many towels, still says yes too quickly, but now she catches herself. She pauses. She breathes. She remembers. And she chooses again. This is what Buddhist compassion looks like after 60. Not just in grand forgiveness, but in the small sacred acts of self-returning. It is the decision to stay soft without staying silent, to love without losing, to give without vanishing, and most of all, to stop apologizing for the very thing that makes you you. Some truths only arrive when the heart grows quiet. For Ellen, that quiet didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, like morning fog that softens the outlines of the world. And in that quiet, she saw something clearly for the first time. Love without space becomes suffocation. Love without stillness becomes noise. She hadn't left her family. She hadn't moved out. She hadn't slammed any doors. But in her spirit, she had begun to walk backwards, just a little, out of the emotional entanglement that had worn her thin for years. It wasn't withdrawal. It wasn't bitterness. It was what Buddhism calls compassionate detachment, the practice of loving without clinging, caring without controlling, staying without dissolving. Ellen had spent most of her life in the kitchen of relationships, stirring, seasoning, keeping the heat just right. She had been the one making sure everyone else was fed, even when her own plate remained empty. But now she was stepping back, not to abandon them, but to breathe. Because breathing, she had learned, is a sacred act, and no one else can do it for you. It began with small choices. She no longer asked, "What can I do for you today?" Instead, she asked herself, "What do I need to feel whole?" She started visiting the temple twice a week. She didn't make a big announcement. She just went. Some mornings she sat under the Bodhi tree in silence. Some days she stayed for the Dharma talks. Other days she simply lit a candle for her past selves and left. The temple had become more than a place. It had become a mirror, and one afternoon, after a particularly long sit, she stayed behind to speak with the monk who often led the chants. His name was Brother Thomas. Soft-spoken, wore glasses with thick frames that slipped down his nose. She told him, "I think I'm learning how to step back without walking away." He smiled gently. "Ah," he said, "you're learning the difference between distance and disconnection." She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" He folded his hands in his lap. In the West, we often confuse love with intensity, with closeness, with involvement. But in Buddhist practice, we learn to love like the sun, offering light and warmth, from a respectful distance. Ellen nodded slowly, a memory surfacing. Her mother used to say, "Don't hover over bread as it rises. It needs space." She had never understood that until now. That evening she sat down with her notebook and wrote, "I do not need to hover to be present. I do not need to fix to be worthy. I do not need to be close to love fully." This shift, the invisible retreat into her own sacred space, began to change the rhythm of the house. Her son noticed first. He walked into the living room one evening and found her painting. A simple canvas, soft strokes of muted color, nothing grand. But something about the stillness of it made him pause. "Mom," he said, "I didn't know you still painted." Ellen looked up, smiling. "I didn't either, until I gave myself time to remember." There was no bitterness in her tone. No accusation. Just truth. Clear and light. He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "It's beautiful." She didn't reply. She didn't rush to say thank you or change the subject. She simply nodded and went back to her brush. Distance is not the absence of love. It is the presence of boundaries. And boundaries, when rooted in compassion, don't push people away. They invite people in gently, truthfully, at the right pace. Megan, too, began to notice, not in grand ways, but in how Ellen no longer responded immediately to every request, in how she began to say, "Let me think about it," instead of course, in how she sat with more peace and less urgency. At first, Megan had misunderstood it as withdrawal, but over time she came to see it as maturity, because Ellen hadn't stopped caring. She had simply stopped overgiving, and that shift, while subtle, had changed the air in the home. The kids, too, began to approach her differently, with curiosity, with awareness. One afternoon, Ben came into her room, no screen, no noise, and, "Grandma, do you ever get bored being alone?" Ellen smiled gently. "Not anymore," she said, "because now I like the person I'm alone with." He nodded, quiet, then sat beside her and asked if she'd teach him how to paint. The next day they painted together on the porch, not talking much. Just brush strokes and soft sunlight. 2 generations sitting side by side, not bound by demands but joined by presence. Ellen realized then, distance isn't just for protection. It's for clarity. It allows love to land more cleanly. It allows you to land more clearly. She had feared that stepping back would make her invisible, but it had made her more visible, because now she was standing in her own light. Buddhism teaches, if your compassion does not include yourself, it is incomplete. And finally, Ellen's compassion had become complete. Not perfect, not easy, but whole. She no longer needed to feel responsible for everyone's happiness. She no longer tied her value to their reactions. She loved her family, but she no longer waited for them to change to feel at peace, because peace, she had discovered, is an inside job, and once found, it doesn't depend on approval. It doesn't fade when others are busy. It doesn't apologize for existing. It simply is. That night she sat at her window again, the silk pillow by her side, candle flickering, and she wrote her shortest entry yet. I'm not distant. I am just finally close to myself. There was no parade, no big revelation. No one clapped when Ellen healed, but something had shifted, not in her family, not in the world, in her. She no longer waited for the door to open from the outside, because she had found the key within. And one evening, as she sat by her window with the soft silk pillow resting in her lap, she realized something simple and beautiful. She had come home to herself. It had taken years of serving, of hoping someone would finally say, I see you. But now, Ellen saw herself. And that changed everything. She no longer needed the perfect words from her son. She no longer longed for validation from Megan. She no longer measured her worth in favors done or gratitude earned. Instead, she measured it in breath, in moments of stillness, in the way her own chest rose and fell, soft and steady. That evening, she poured herself a cup of tea, her favorite chamomile blend with a little honey. She sat in her favorite chair, tucked her feet beneath her, and let silence bloom around her like a gentle fog. In the corner, a framed photo of her husband smiled back at her. She nodded toward it, softly, as if to say, "I'm okay now." And she meant it, not because life was perfect, but because she had stopped demanding it to be. Because that was the greatest shift of all. Ellen had stopped expecting life, or love, to rescue her. She had become the soft ground she returned to, the shelter, the center. That night, her granddaughter Sophie came into the room. She carried a book. "Grandma, can I sit with you?" Ellen smiled. "Of course." Sophie curled up beside her. "I like being in here. It's quiet, but it doesn't feel lonely." Ellen placed a hand gently on her arm. "That's because I'm not lonely anymore." Sophie blinked. "Weren't you?" "For a long time," Ellen nodded. "But I learned something." "What?" "That loneliness isn't the absence of people. It's the absence of being with yourself." Sophie was quiet, thoughtful. Then, after a pause, she said, "I want to learn that too." And Ellen knew this was it. Not a teaching in a classroom, not a speech, but a transmission. From woman to girl, from pain to peace, from silence to presence. This was the legacy, not recipes passed down, not furniture or jewelry, but inner space, emotional clarity, love that doesn't erase itself to exist. She remembered a line from a Buddhist text she once heard at the temple. "The one who returns to herself has nowhere else to go and nowhere she'd rather be." That was Ellen now, no longer waiting, no longer bending, just being. And slowly, without realizing it, the people around her began to shift. Not dramatically, not instantly, but something softened. Megan started asking, "Do you have time to rest today?" David would check in more. "What are you working on, Mom?" "You seem peaceful lately." Even the kids lingered longer. They didn't know what had changed, but they could feel it, because that's the power of someone who comes home to themselves. They become a mirror, a lighthouse, a quiet invitation. Not "love me more," but "I already am love." Not "see me," but "I see myself." And in doing so, they give others permission to do the same. Ellen didn't need applause. She didn't need a medal for surviving. She just needed this. The gentle knowing that she could live the rest of her life as herself. No longer a background character, no longer a silent servant, but a full person, a woman with a soft pillow, a notebook full of truths, and a heart no longer waiting to be rescued. When she went to bed that night, she left the window open. A breeze drifted in. The curtains swayed, and in that quiet room, one woman lay still. Not afraid, not empty, but whole. And if anyone had looked closely, they would have seen the smallest smile on her face. Not loud, not proud, just peaceful. Because she had done the hardest thing a person can do. She had stopped begging for love and started becoming it. Maybe you've been like Ellen, sitting quietly in a home you helped build, feeling more like the furniture than a person. Maybe you've loved so deeply, so constantly, that somewhere along the way you forgot what your own breath sounded like. Maybe you've apologized for things that weren't yours to carry. Maybe you've been invisible while smiling through it all. But maybe, just maybe, right here, right now, you feel something shifting, not because your family changed, not because someone finally saw you, but because you paused long enough to ask, what if I came home to myself first? This story wasn't about blame. It wasn't about walking away. It was about the sacred space that opens when we stop giving from emptiness and start offering from fullness. Buddhism teaches peace does not mean to be in a place where there is no noise or trouble. Peace means to be in the midst of those things and still be calm in your heart. Ellen found that peace not in silence, but in choosing her silence. Not in distance, but in intentional space. And now, maybe it's your turn to pick up your own notebook, to pour a cup of tea you actually enjoy, to light a candle and whisper not someone else's name, but your own. If this story met you somewhere quiet inside, let it stay with you. Let it echo in the hallway of your heart. Let it soften the places that have long been hardened by overgiving. And when you're ready, come back. There are more stories waiting, more reminders that your life, exactly as it is worthy of gentleness, of breath, of beginning again. You are not a burden. You are not a burden. You are not invisible. You are not too late to return home. No.